The speech opens with a sharp, direct statement about pressure being the ultimate truth teller, not about loneliness or confusion, but specifically about how pressure strips away every mask and forces you to see who you actually are beneath the performance. It establishes immediately that most people live their entire lives in comfort zones where they never have to face their real selves, where they can pretend, perform, and maintain an image that makes them feel safe and accepted. The opening hook must hit like a revelation. Pressure isn't your enemy trying to destroy you, it's a mirror being held up to show you what's real versus what's been carefully constructed. This section builds the foundation that comfort is actually dangerous because it allows you to live in illusion, to believe your own press releases, to think you're stronger, wiser, and more capable than you actually are when the heat is off. Then pressure comes a crisis, a loss, a betrayal, a failure, and suddenly everything you thought was solid begins to crack, and you realize you've been living as a version of yourself that can only exist when conditions are perfect. From there, we dive into the deep pain of discovering that the person you've been presenting to the world isn't who you are under pressure, and how terrifying that realization feels when it first hits. This section explores the exhaustion of performing, of waking up every day and putting on the mask of confidence, success, happiness, or strength when inside you feel hollow, uncertain, and fragile. It addresses the specific fear that if people saw the real you, the one who panics, who doubts, who breaks down when things get hard, they would reject you, abandon you, or confirm your worst fear that you're not enough. The writing here needs to capture the weight of living a double life, the public version that smiles and says, "I'm fine," and the private version that crumbles the moment the door closes. We touch on approval-seeking behavior, how you shaped yourself into whatever form gets you love, acceptance, or validation, and how exhausting it is to constantly monitor and adjust yourself based on other people's reactions. The pain point intensifies as we describe what happens when pressure enters this carefully constructed life and begins to squeeze deadlines you can't meet, relationships that demand authenticity, challenges that require a strength you've only pretended to have. Then comes the breaking point, the moment when pressure becomes so intense that you can't maintain the performance anymore, and everything you've been hiding comes spilling out into the open. This is where we paint the picture of someone who's been holding it together for years, suddenly finding themselves in a situation where holding it together is no longer possible. The job that exposes your incompetence, the relationship that demands vulnerability you don't have, the crisis that requires courage you've never developed. We explore the shame and terror of being seen in your weakness, of having people witness the gap between who you said you were and who you actually are when tested. This section needs to feel visceral and personal, like we're describing a specific moment of collapse that the listener has either experienced or deeply fears experiencing. We acknowledge the desire to run, to quit, to escape before anyone sees the full truth, and the devastating feeling of realizing that you don't even know yourself anymore because you've spent so long being who others needed you to be. Here we shift to examining why people avoid pressure at all costs and what they lose by doing so, creating a bridge from pain to the wisdom that's coming. This section explores how humans are masters of constructing comfortable lives that never test them, never push them, never force them to grow beyond the safe identity they've created. We talk about the person who stays in the job they've outgrown because it's easy, the relationship they remain in because it's familiar, the city they never leave because change is terrifying. The pain here is subtle but profound. It's the pain of wasted potential, of reaching the end of your life and realizing you never actually met yourself because you were too afraid of what pressure might reveal. We address the emptiness that comes from living small, the quiet desperation of knowing you're capable of more but choosing safety over truth. This section plants the seed that avoiding pressure isn't protecting you, it's imprisoning you, and that the very thing you're running from is actually the doorway to discovering who you really are. The final beat of this section acknowledges that pressure is coming whether you choose it or not. Life has a way of forcing the question, and the only choice you have is whether you'll step into it willingly or wait until it crashes into you unexpectedly. This section begins by shifting from the pain of pressure into the profound wisdom of why pressure exists in the first place, introducing the concept that pressure is not random chaos, but a deliberate force of transformation that separates what's real from what's pretend. We open with the analogy of the potter and the clay, but reimagine the clay sitting on the shelf is just potential. It's soft and shapeless and useless. But when the potter puts it on the wheel and applies pressure with his hands, spinning it faster and faster, pressing harder and harder, that's when the clay becomes something with form, with purpose, with strength. The pressure isn't punishment, it's the very thing that gives the clay its identity, and without it, the clay would remain forever formless, forever useless, forever unable to hold anything of value. We then introduce the manufacturer principle. Every product that matters is tested under conditions far more extreme than normal use, because the manufacturer wants to know what happens when stress is applied. when weight is added, when heat is turned up, and the products that pass the test are the ones that get certified, trusted, and released into the world. From there, we move into the seed analogy, but completely reimagined to fit the pressure theme. The seed buried in darkness has tons of soil pressing down on it from above, and that pressure is what forces the seed to push its roots deeper into the earth instead of staying shallow and weak. The seed could complain about the weight, could wish for easier conditions, could curse the darkness and the pressure. But that pressure is literally what creates the root system strong enough to eventually break through the surface and become a tree that can withstand storms. Without the pressure of the soil, the seed would never develop the strength to survive, would never grow deep roots, would never become anything more than a fragile sprout that the first wind could destroy. We emphasize that what looks like the seed's enemy, the crushing weight of earth, is actually its teacher, forcing it to grow in ways comfort never could, forcing it to develop strength in the hidden places where no one can see. Now we transition into the first mini story, the lion cub learning to hunt. A young lion cub grows up watching its mother hunt, imitating her movements, playing at being fierce, but it's all performance, all play, all pretend, until the day comes when the cub is hungry, truly hungry, and the mother steps back and refuses to provide. The pressure of hunger, of real need, of survival being on the line, that's what transforms the cub's play into real hunting. That's what turns imitation into instinct. That's what reveals whether the cub has what it takes to be a lion or not. In the comfort of a full belly, the cub never has to find out who it really is. But in the pressure of starvation, the lion inside wakes up and learns to kill. The story lands with this truth. Pressure doesn't create the lion. Pressure reveals the lion that was always there. And without pressure, the cub would never know its own nature, would never step into its own power, would remain forever dependent on someone else to feed it. The second mini story follows a craftsman forging a blade in his workshop, taking a piece of raw metal and placing it into fire, so hot it glows orange and red. The metal doesn't become a sword in the comfort of room temperature. It becomes a sword because the craftsman heats it until it's soft enough to shape, then hammers it with violent, repeated strikes that would destroy anything weak. Each strike of the hammer looks like destruction, sounds like violence, feels like the metal is being punished. But actually, each strike is removing impurities, aligning molecules, creating the edge that will eventually cut through anything. Then comes the most intense part. The craftsman plunges the red-hot blade into cold water, and the metal screams, steam rising, the blade experiencing the most extreme pressure of temperature shock. And this is the moment that determines everything. If the blade has flaws, hidden weaknesses, internal fractures, the quench will shatter it into pieces. But if the blade is true, if it's been properly forged, the pressure will harden it into something unbreakable. The craftsman doesn't apologize for the fire or the hammer or the water. He knows that what he's creating requires exactly this level of intensity, and a blade that never experiences pressure will never hold an edge. The third mini story is about a person, a young professional who spent years building a career that looked perfect from the outside, good job, good salary, good reputation, but inside felt completely hollow and lost. Everything was fine until pressure came in the form of a company restructuring, a layoff, a sudden loss of the identity they'd built their entire life around. In that moment of pressure, when the job was gone and the title was stripped away and the income disappeared, they had to face the question they'd been avoiding for years. Who am I when I'm not performing, when I'm not producing, when I'm not succeeding? The pressure was excruciating because it forced them to sit with the emptiness they'd been running from, forced them to confront the fact that they'd built their entire identity on external validation, forced them to feel the terror of not knowing who they were beneath the resume. But in that pressure, in that darkness, something began to shift. They started asking different questions, started exploring what they actually cared about instead of what impressed other people, started building a life based on internal truth instead of external approval. The pressure didn't destroy them, it destroyed the false version of them. And what emerged was someone real, someone grounded, someone who finally knew themselves. We then weave in the spiritual parallel without being religious. The image of gold being refined in fire. How the refiner heats the gold until all the impurities rise to the surface where they can be skimmed away. And how the refiner knows the gold is pure when he can see his own reflection in it. Pressure brings everything hidden to the surface, your fears, your weaknesses, your true character. And that surfacing is painful but necessary because you can't remove what you can't see. This is the deep wisdom. Pressure isn't trying to break you. Pressure is trying to purify you, to strip away everything that isn't really you, so that what remains is true, solid, unshakable. We acknowledge that this process feels like death. It feels like everything is falling apart, feels like you're losing yourself. But actually you're losing the false self, the performed self, the self that could only exist in comfort. And what's being revealed is who you actually are when everything else is burned away. Here we insert the retention hook exactly as specified. Before I continue, answer one question honestly. What has pressure revealed about you that comfort kept hidden? If you're still listening, something inside you is waking up. This creates a pause, a moment for the listener to reflect on their own experience with pressure, to connect the wisdom to their own story, and to recognize that their continued attention means something in them is ready for this truth, ready to stop running from pressure and start understanding it as the force that's shaping them into who they're meant to become. This section marks the major shift in the speech from understanding pressure to embracing it, from seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances to recognizing yourself as someone being intentionally formed by those very circumstances. We begin by dismantling the victim mindset with a powerful reframe. Pressure doesn't break you. Pressure reveals what was already broken. And that revelation is actually a gift because you can't fix what you don't know is damaged. The person who never faces pressure lives their entire life with internal fractures they don't know exist, with weaknesses they never address, with a foundation that's crumbling but hidden under a beautiful exterior. And then one day, everything collapses without warning. But the person who faces pressure early, who allows the testing to happen, who doesn't run when things get hard, they discover their weak points while there's still time to reinforce them, still time to rebuild, still time to become strong where they were fragile. We emphasize that real strength isn't about never breaking. Real strength is about knowing exactly where your breaking points are and doing the work to fortify them before the ultimate test comes. From here, we introduce the distinction between real strength and performed strength, and this distinction is critical to the entire message. Performed strength is what you display when conditions are favorable, when people are watching, when you've had enough sleep and enough support and enough resources. It's strength that requires perfect conditions to exist. Real strength is what remains when everything is stripped away, when you're exhausted, when you're alone, when no one is cheering for you, when there's no reward in sight. It's strength that exists independent of circumstances. Pressure is the only way to know which kind of strength you have. And most people discover too late that what they thought was strength was actually just a performance that could only survive in comfort. We paint the picture of someone who talks about resilience, but has never actually had to be resilient. Someone who speaks about courage, but has never actually had to be courageous. Someone who claims to have faith, but has never actually had to trust when everything visible was falling apart. Pressure doesn't care about your words. Pressure doesn't care about your intentions. Pressure only cares about what you actually do when the cost is real and the pain is unbearable and the outcome is uncertain. Now we move into the profound truth about direction emerging only under pressure, tying back to the navigation principle that you can't steer a stationary ship. When life is comfortable and easy, you can maintain the illusion that you're heading somewhere meaningful, but you never really know because you're not actually being tested, not actually making hard choices, not actually sacrificing anything that matters. Pressure forces direction. Because pressure forces choice, you can't go in every direction when resources are limited, when time is running out, when stakes are high. The person wandering aimlessly in comfort suddenly becomes laser focused under pressure, because pressure eliminates all the noise, all the distractions, all the options that don't actually matter. And what remains is the path that's real, the goal that's true, the direction you're actually willing to suffer for. We emphasize that this is why people who coast through easy lives often reach middle age with no idea what they actually want, while people who face pressure young often have crystal clear direction because pressure forced them to decide what was worth fighting for. The next layer explores how identity crystallizes when everything else is stripped away, when all the external markers you've been using to define yourself are removed and you're left with only what's internal, only what's essential, only what can't be taken from you. We describe the experience of losing everything you thought made you who you are, the relationship that gave you identity, the career that gave you purpose, the achievement that gave you worth, and in that loss, in that emptiness, discovering that you still exist, that there's a core self that remains when everything external is gone. This is where identity stops being about what you do or who you know or what you've accomplished and starts being about who you are in the dark, in the silence, in the pressure when no one is watching and no one is applauding. We paint this as a liberation. The terror of being stripped down is also the freedom of discovering that your worth isn't dependent on performance, that your identity isn't dependent on validation, that who you are is deeper and more solid than anything circumstances can touch. Here we build momentum with rhythmic, powerful lines that start to activate something in the listener, lines that feel like a drum beat or a heartbeat, lines that create emotional momentum. You grow in the dark. You heal in the silence. You rise in the breaking. You become in the pressure. You discover in the loss. You strengthen in the struggle. You clarify in the chaos. You emerge in the fire. These lines should flow one after another without explanation. Just pure declarative truth that builds energy and starts to shift the listener's emotional state from understanding to activation. We're no longer just teaching, we're now calling something forth, waking something up, reminding the listener of a strength they forgot they had. Then we address the freedom of being exposed. And this is a crucial and often overlooked truth. Once pressure has revealed your weakness, once you've been seen in your failure, once the mask has been torn off and everyone knows you're not perfect, there's a strange and powerful freedom in that exposure. You no longer have to maintain the image. You no longer have to pretend. You no longer have to live in fear of being found out because you've already been found out and you survived it. The energy you were using to hide, to perform, to maintain the illusion is suddenly available for actually growing, actually healing, actually becoming who you're meant to be. We describe the relief of someone who finally stops pretending, who finally admits they don't have it all together, who finally shows up as they actually are and discovers that authenticity connects them to people in ways performance never could. The pressure that exposed you also freed you, and that freedom becomes the foundation for real transformation. We continue building momentum by exploring the difference between who you pretend to be and who you are under fire, and we make it clear that who you are under fire is who you really are. Everything else is just a story you tell yourself when conditions allow for stories. The person you become when your back is against the wall, when failure means devastation, when there's no safety net and no plan B, that person is the truth of you, and every moment of comfort is just a vacation from that truth. This isn't meant to be harsh. It's meant to be clarifying. Stop judging yourself based on who you are on your best day in perfect conditions. Start knowing yourself based on who you are on your worst day when everything is falling apart, because that's the version of you that determines whether you make it or not. The final movement of this section is about embracing pressure as the sculptor of your destiny, accepting that the life you want, the person you want to become, the impact you want to make, all of it requires a version of you that can only be forged under conditions you would never choose. We describe pressure as the price of admission to the life you say you want, the toll booth you have to pass through, the initiation you can't skip. Every person you admire, every leader you respect, every story that moves you, they all pass through pressure. They all faced the fire. They all had moments where they could have quit and chose to stay. And that choice in the pressure is what made them who they are. You don't get to become that person by avoiding what they went through. You don't get the destination without the journey. You don't get the strength without the struggle. And the sooner you stop resisting pressure and start recognizing it as the tool that's shaping you, the sooner you stop suffering and start becoming. This final section is where everything converges into a cinematic, emotionally charged climax that shifts the listener from understanding to conviction, from conviction to identity activation, from passive listening to internal awakening. We open with a prophetic declaration that lands like a truth the listener has always known but never had words for. You are being forged right now, in this very moment, in this very season. And what feels like suffering is actually preparation. What feels like breaking is actually becoming. What feels like the end is actually the beginning of who you were always meant to be. The pressure you're experiencing isn't random, isn't punishment. It isn't evidence that you're on the wrong path. It's evidence that you're on the exact right path. And something in you is being prepared for what's coming next. We paint the picture of a warrior being trained, a diamond being cut, a sword being sharpened, and we make it visceral and personal. This is happening to you right now, whether you recognize it or not. We transition into addressing the listener directly with intimate authority, speaking to the part of them that's been questioning why life has been so hard, why things haven't worked out the way they planned, why they keep facing obstacles that other people seem to avoid. The answer is simple and profound. You're not like other people. You're not being prepared for an ordinary life. You're not meant to coast through on comfort and ease. The pressure you face is proportional to the purpose you carry. And the reason your testing is so intense is because what you're being prepared for requires a level of strength, clarity, and resilience that can only be developed through exactly what you're going through. We acknowledge that this doesn't make the pressure easier, doesn't remove the pain, doesn't erase the moments when you wanted to quit. But it reframes everything. It gives meaning to the suffering. It transforms your story from tragedy to transformation. Here we introduce a crucial distinction that elevates the entire message. This pressure is not about you surviving. It's about you discovering what survives when everything else is burned away. Most people think the goal of pressure is to make it through intact, to come out the other side, still resembling who they were before. But that's not the goal at all. The goal is to let pressure strip away everything that isn't essential, everything that isn't true, everything that was only there because it looked good or felt comfortable or seemed like what you were supposed to be. What remains after pressure has done its work is the irreducible core of who you are, the part of you that can't be taken, can't be broken, can't be destroyed by any circumstance. That core is what you're discovering right now, and it's stronger than you know, deeper than you realize, more powerful than you've ever allowed yourself to believe. We build intensity by describing what happens when someone finally stops running from pressure and turns to face it. Everything changes. The pressure doesn't disappear, but your relationship to it transforms completely. Instead of being crushed by circumstances, you start using circumstances as fuel. Instead of asking, why is this happening to me? You start asking, what is this revealing in me? What is this calling out of me? What am I becoming through this? And that shift, that single shift in perspective, is the difference between someone who breaks under pressure and someone who breaks through because of it. We paint the image of a person standing in the fire and realizing the fire isn't destroying them, it's refining them. And in that realization, they stop being a victim of the fire and become a partner with it. Now we move into the core identity activation, the prophetic declaration that calls forth the truth of who the listener is beneath all the doubt and fear and confusion. We speak directly to their identity. You are not weak. You are being strengthened. You are not broken. You are being rebuilt. You are not lost. You are being redirected. You are not failing. You are being filtered. Every person who changed the world, who built something lasting, who lived a life that mattered, they all walked through pressure that nearly destroyed them. And what made them different wasn't that they were stronger or smarter or more talented. It was that they refused to let pressure define them as a victim and instead let pressure refine them as a warrior. We emphasize that this isn't metaphor, isn't motivation, isn't empty encouragement. This is the actual process of transformation. And the listener is in it right now, whether they recognize it or not. We intensify the momentum by addressing what's on the other side of this pressure, painting a vivid picture of who they're becoming, someone who doesn't need perfect conditions to thrive, someone who doesn't need constant validation to know their worth, someone who doesn't need the approval of others to make bold moves, someone who carries a quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from having been tested and having passed the test. We describe the way people will sense something different about them, something solid, something real, something that can't be faked or performed. It's the presence of someone who knows who they are because they've been stripped down to their core and rebuilt from the foundation up. It's the strength of someone who's faced their worst fears and discovered they're still standing. It's the clarity of someone who's lost everything that didn't matter and found everything that does. Here we introduce the concept that pressure reveals not just who you are, but what you're capable of. And those are two different things. Who you are is your character, your core, your foundation. That's what pressure tests and purifies. But what you're capable of is your potential, your power, your capacity to impact the world. And that only emerges when pressure forces you to reach deeper than you've ever reached before, to find resources you didn't know you had, to do things you never thought you could do. We tell the story of the person who discovers they're capable of starting over after losing everything, capable of standing alone when everyone walks away, capable of creating beauty from ashes and hope from devastation. That person was always in there, but comfort never called it forth. Only pressure could do that. We shift to addressing the lie that many people believe, that pressure means they're doing something wrong, that if they were on the right path, things would be easier, that struggle is evidence of failure. We dismantle this lie with force and clarity. The right path is often the hardest path. The calling that's truly yours will cost you everything, and the dream that's worth pursuing will require a version of you that doesn't exist yet. Pressure isn't a sign you're off course. Pressure is often the sign you're exactly on course, and the journey is demanding that you level up, that you grow, that you become someone you're not yet. We paint the alternative, the easy path, the comfortable path, the path where nothing is required of you, and we show how that path leads to a quiet, haunting regret, the regret of someone who never found out who they could have been because they chose safety over truth. Now we build to the emotional peak with a series of powerful declarations that feel like a calling, like a commissioning, like a benediction over the listener's life. What's coming for you requires the version of you that's being forged in this fire. What you're about to step into demands the strength you're developing right now. The person you're becoming in this pressure is exactly who you'll need to be for what's next. This isn't random. This isn't cruel. This is intentional preparation for a specific purpose. We make it clear that their suffering has meaning, their struggle has purpose, their pain is producing something valuable that they'll need, and nothing they're going through is wasted. Every tear is watering seeds they can't see yet. Every loss is making space for something better. Every moment they wanted to quit but didn't is building a resilience they'll depend on for the rest of their life. We transition into the challenge portion where we stop comforting and start confronting, where we call the listener higher and demand more because we know they're capable of more. Stop waiting for pressure to stop. Stop praying for easier circumstances. Stop hoping that one day life will require nothing of you. Instead, we challenge them to step into the pressure intentionally, to face what they've been avoiding, to do the hard thing they've been putting off, to have the difficult conversation, to make the scary decision, to take the risk that terrifies them. We make it clear that they can wait for pressure to force them into growth, or they can choose pressure proactively and grow on their terms. But either way, growth requires pressure, and avoiding pressure is avoiding becoming. The person who runs from pressure ends up facing it anyway, just without the dignity of having chosen it, without the power of having prepared for it. But immediately after the challenge comes the hope, because challenge without hope is just cruelty, and our goal is transformation, not condemnation. We paint the picture of what's on the other side: freedom, clarity, peace that isn't dependent on circumstances, joy that can't be stolen by hardship, purpose that gives meaning to everything they've survived. We describe the moment when they look back on this season and realize that the worst thing that ever happened to them was also the best thing that ever happened to them, because it forced them to become who they needed to be. We speak to the future version of them that will be grateful for the pressure, grateful for the breaking, grateful for the fire that burned away everything false and left only what was true. The final movement is deeply personal and prophetic. The person you are under pressure is the person you really are. Everything else is just a story you tell yourself when life gives you permission to pretend. But the truth always emerges when the weight gets heavy enough, when the stakes get high enough, when there's no more room to hide. And what's emerging in you right now, beneath the fear, beneath the doubt, beneath the exhaustion, is something gold, something unbreakable, something that was worth the pressure required to reveal it. We declare over them that they're not a victim, they're a victor in the making. They're not falling apart, they're falling together. They're not losing themselves, they're finding themselves. And the version of them that emerges from this fire will be someone they're proud to be, someone they trust completely, someone who knows exactly who they are, because pressure proved it. We close the climactic section with a final declaration that serves as both conclusion and commission. This pressure is not your end, it's your beginning. This breaking is not your destruction, it's your reconstruction. This fire is not consuming you, it's revealing you. And when you emerge, and you will emerge, you'll carry something no one can fake, no one can buy, no one can give you the quiet, unshakable certainty of someone who's been tested and proven true. We leave them with the image of themselves as refined gold, forged steel, a diamond that was coal until pressure transformed it into something precious, something valuable, something that catches light and reflects it in ways that only pressure could create. Then we transition naturally and softly into the call to action, dropping the intensity but maintaining the intimacy. If this message spoke to your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. And if you want more messages that grow your soul, subscribe, because your journey has just begun. The CTA feels like a natural continuation of the relationship we've built over the speech, an invitation rather than a demand, a next step for those who felt something shift inside them while listening. The conclusion begins by bringing the listener back to the central truth one final time, not as a repeat, but as a deepening, as a final anchoring of everything that's been said. We open with a reflective tone that acknowledges the journey they've just taken through this message. You came into this listening perhaps believing that pressure was your enemy, that the weight you're carrying is evidence of something wrong in your life, that the breaking you're experiencing means you failed, but now you know different. Now you see what pressure really is: not your destroyer, but your revealer, not your punishment, but your preparation, not the thing ending your story, but the thing beginning your true story. We then acknowledge the reality that this understanding doesn't remove the pressure, doesn't make tomorrow easier, doesn't eliminate the challenges they're facing. The fire is still hot, the weight is still heavy, the test is still hard. But you're not the same person you were 30 minutes ago, because now you understand what the fire is for, what the weight is building, what the test is proving. We emphasize that this shift in perspective is everything. The circumstances may not change immediately, but their relationship to those circumstances has fundamentally transformed. And that transformation changes everything about how they move forward. Here we plant the seed of legacy, of impact beyond their own life. One day someone is going to look at your life and wonder how you made it through what you made it through. They're going to ask you what kept you going when everything in you wanted to quit. And you'll be able to tell them the truth. That pressure doesn't break people who understand what it's for. That fire doesn't destroy gold, it purifies it. That the worst seasons of your life were also the most important seasons of your life, because they revealed who you really are beneath everything you thought you were supposed to be. We make it clear that their current suffering is creating future testimony, that their present endurance is building future authority to speak into other people's lives when they face their own pressure. We return briefly to the opening theme, creating a full circle moment that gives the speech coherence and completion. Pressure reveals who you really are, not who you pretend to be when life is easy, not who you perform as when people are watching, but who you actually are when everything is stripped away. And all that remains is the irreducible core of your character, your strength, your faith, your will. And what pressure is revealing in you right now is someone stronger than you knew, someone braver than you believed, someone more capable than you imagined. This declaration serves as both summary and send-off, reminding them of where they started and showing them how far they've come in understanding. The tone shifts to one of quiet certainty as we prepare to release them back into their lives. The pressure you're in right now is not permanent, but who you're becoming through it is. The fire will eventually cool, but the gold it refines will remain. The weight will eventually lift, but the strength it built will stay with you for the rest of your life. So don't waste this pressure trying to escape it. Don't spend this season wishing you were somewhere else. This is where you're being made into who you need to be, and one day you'll look back and realize this was the most valuable season you ever lived through. We end with a final encouragement that lands like a blessing. You're not breaking. You're becoming. The pressure isn't destroying you. It's revealing you. And what's being revealed is worth everything it's costing to bring it to the surface. Hold on. Stay in the fire. Trust the process. Because the person emerging from this pressure is someone the world desperately needs, someone real, someone tested, someone true. And that person is you.